In the 1950s, photographer Chen Zhonglie documented the feudalist Tibet of those time with his photography. The scenes in these old photographs would seem, by the standards of people today, to depict a very remote past. However, we all know this was no more than half a century ago. This was the cruel reality. The Tibet of those days was a feudal serfdom. Tibet's feudal system had been produced somewhere between the mid-9th to 13th centuries and lasted up until the 20th century. It was a backward and brutal regime. Government officials, aristocrats and monks from the upper echelons, although making up only about 5% of the total population, owned almost all of Tibet's land, pastures, forests and livestock, whereas 95% or more of the population were serfs and slaves who possessed next to nothing. We can still find the old secular code in the archives of Tibet Autonomous Region. According to the laws of Old Tibet, Tibetan society was divided into 9 classes and 3 categories. Government officials, nobles, and top-ranking clergy were considered to have a superior class, legally worth their weight in gold, whereas the value of a single human life further down on a pecking order was only equal to that of a straw rope. These were human rights under the old system in Tibet. Tibetan serfs were divided into 3 levels: the Chapa, Tuichon, and the Langshen. Chapa serfs were given a piece of land to till by the feudal lords, but performed compulsory labor for the landowner as well as the Tibetan government. The Tuichon were basically small families with no land of their own. The Langshen were slaves. Not one of the serf classes enjoyed personal freedom. The peasants who worked the land were also forced to pay taxes, but also forced to perform heavy amounts of labor exacted in lieu of taxes. They would do work for the government, such as building roads, cutting grass, chopping firewood, assisting in construction projects, transporting luggage and cargo for traveling soldiers and officials. In Old Tibet, there was a proverb: exorbitant taxes are as plentiful as yak hair, paid out from birth to death. Young serfs had to pay a baby tax. If one wanted to become a lama, there was the temple entrance tax. If taken to prison, one would be fined an imprisonment tax. Even after one's death, family members would have to pay a burial tax.
미지 부지 계비나 아니 디 민주국에 민주국이나 아니 기타 배산 주주의 장갑실이 아니 람상 안주날 부지 계수 기부인 안전되지 인식에 야 본부야 지지자 가다게 아니 장갑지에 법무지에서는 저리 법무지에서 님들이 아니 기인식하자 미 대리 어느 법무지야 지나라나스 다 저기 조금 조금 제다서는 아니 뒤에 가서 법무지 미리라는 거 법무지 다
In this way, the serfs toiled year after year, being deprived of the very fruits of their labor. Many of the land-renting serfs could not even rely on the food grown on their land to make a living. Instead, they were forced to collect and sell yak chips. Still, others were forced to live on edible wild herbs for several months at a time. Under such oppression, all of the serfs were in debt, a debt which went back countless generations. Today, the majority of middle-aged Chinese still remember this feature film. The film follows the story of an ordinary Tibetan serf. Performer Wang Dui actually spent the first 17 years of his life as a Chanba peasant, and then 8 years as a poverty-stricken lama.
是这个里头反映的就是有些东西当喇嘛呀，这个喂马呀、放马呀，都是基本上是我的生活。我也曾经这个半夜里起来喂马，因为那个时候小孩嘛爱睡觉。 半夜里起来以后喂3只马嘛，有时候这个睡着了，工头喊了以后就睡没醒，他就下来打你，那就这个打骂的事情是平常的事儿了。
Xiangba is a level of peasant belonging to the lower serf class, Langshan. Langshan spent their entire lives working for a master. Their children also grew up to be a Langshan, essentially the master's property. Masters were completely in their right to punish, abuse, sell, give away, imprison, or even murder their servants as they saw fit. In the master's eyes, they were nothing more than talking beasts of burden. This is a contract of serf trading signed by a Nechung monastery. Overworked serfs were forced to flee and beg for food, and countless people died in the street. In cities and towns like Lhasa and Shikaza, old people, women and children begging for food could be seen everywhere. Before the liberation of Tibet, 4,000 to 5,000 of Lhasa's near 30,000 residents were beggars.
当我们刚上拉萨的时候，拉萨那个大昭寺跟前，全是垃圾堆满了。这里面这个乞丐就是那个讨饭的，大人、小孩、狗都睡在那个垃圾堆里面，这是一个问题。再一个呢，喇嘛念经以后啊，从上面扔下那个小糌粑坨坨叫刺里巴，那个糌粑。糌粑坨坨从大昭寺那个喇嘛从路上扔下来的时候啊，下面狗和人在一起抢的时候呢，一个小女孩的手呢，狗咬了以后光流血，我在当场看到我都哭了。
In old Tibet, very barbaric and cruel punishments were still practiced, such as eye gouging, cutting off of the ears, hands and feet, and water torture. Almost every large estate had a serf owner who would set up their own prison and produce a variety of torture instruments. The desire for and pursuit of freedom by anyone of the serf class was a serious crime. The fifth Dalai Lama once decreed, "People of Lariziba, heed my words. If you again seek freedom or comfort, I've authorized your masters to cut off your hands, cut off your feet, gouge out your eyes, beat you and kill you." This order was reiterated by future authorities on many occasions. After seeing these kinds of historical records, we would simply have to say that old Tibet was in fact one of the most serious human rights violators in the world. Some of the old aristocracy were aware of the severity of this social crisis. Tibetan government official Ngapor Ngawang Jigme, when discussing this issue with friends, believes that had things gone on the way they were, it wouldn't have been long before all of the serfs died out, leaving the upper class unable to survive, and essentially wiping out the entire civilization.
So it was a system that was a very poor system, very unfair, and what was unusual is that that continued until 1959, that system. It was probably the last example of that kind of a feudal society that existed anywhere until that time.
We have to understand, sometimes there is a view, which one hears mainly in Europe and America, that Tibet in the time of the Dalai Lamas was a kind of paradise. This is complete nonsense, of course.